Good morning, kids. This morning I'm going to read a book, and I hope you'll enjoy it. The title for the day is Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's a fun book. Long ago, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a lovely young princess named Snow White. Her stepmother, the queen, was cruel and vain. She hated anyone whose beauty rivaled her own, and she watched her stepdaughter with angry, jealous eyes. The queen had magical powers and owned a wondrous mirror that spoke. Every day she stood there before it and asked, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And every day the mirror answered, "You are the fairest one of all, O Queen, the fairest our eyes have ever seen." As time passed, Snow White grew more and more beautiful, and the Queen grew more and more envious. So she forced the princess to dress in rags and work from dawn until dusk. There she is. Despite all the hard work, Snow White stayed sweet, gentle, and cheerful. Day after day she washed and swept and scrubbed, and day after day she dreamed of a handsome prince who would come and carry her off to his castle. One day, when the queen spoke to the mirror, it replied with the news that she was dreading. There was someone even more beautiful than the queen, and that person was Snow White. The queen was shocked. The queen sent for her huntsman. "Take Snow White deep into the forest," she said, "and there, my faithful huntsman, you will dispatch her." The man begged the queen to have mercy, but she would not be persuaded. "Silence," she warned. "You know the penalty if you fail." The next day, Snow White, never suspecting that she was in danger, went off with the huntsman. When they were deep in the woods, the huntsman drew his knife, then suddenly he fell to his knees. "I can't do it," he sobbed. "Forgive me." He told her it was the queen who had ordered his wicked deed. "The queen," gasped Snow White. "She's jealous of you," said the huntsman. "She'll stop at nothing. Quick, run away, and don't come back. I'll lie to the queen. Now go, run, hide." Frightened, Snow White fled through the woods. Branches tore at her clothes, sharp twigs scratched her arms and legs. Strange eyes stared from the shadows. Danger lurked everywhere. Snow White ran on and on. Look at her, scared, running through the woods. At last Snow White fell wearily to the ground and began to weep. The gentle animals of the forest gathered around and tried to comfort her. Chirping and chattering, they led her to a tiny cottage. "Oh," said Snow White, "it's adorable, just like a doll's house." Look at those little animals in the little cottage. But inside, the little table and chairs were covered with dust, and the sink was filled with dirty dishes. "My," said Snow White, perhaps the children who live here are orphans and need someone to take care of them. Maybe they'll let me stay and keep house for them." The animals all helped, and soon the place was nice and tidy, neat and tidy. Meanwhile, the seven dwarfs who lived in the cottage were heading home from the mine where they worked. The dwarfs were amazed to find their house so clean. They were even more amazed when they went upstairs and saw Snow White. "It's a girl," said Doc. "She's beautiful," sighed Bashful. "Oh," said Grumpy, "she's going to be trouble. Mark my words." And there were the seven dwarfs marching home from work, and when they first discovered Snow White. Snow White woke with a start and saw the dwarfs gathered around her. "Why, you're not children," she said. "You're little men." I read your names on the beds," she continued. "Let me guess who you are. You're Doc, and you're Bashful. You're Sleepy, you're Sneezy. And you're Happy, and you're dopey. You must be grumpy." When Snow White told the dwarfs about the queen's plan to kill her, they decided that she would stay away and stay with them. "We're asking for trouble," huffed Grumpy, "but we can't let her get caught by that wicked queen, said Doc. The others agreed. That night after supper, they all sang and danced and made merry music. Bashful played the concertina, Happy played the drums, Sleepy tooted his horn, Grumpy played the organ, and Dopey wiggled his ears. Snow White loved her new friends, and she felt safe at last. Meanwhile, the queen had learned from her mirror that Snow White was still alive. With a magic spell, she turned herself into an old peddler woman. She filled a basket with apples, putting a poison apple on top. "One bite," she cackled, "and Snow White will fall asleep forever. Then I will be the fairest in the land." Look at that. She became a nasty old peddler woman with a poison apple. The next morning, before they left for the mine, the dwarfs warned Snow White to be on her guard. "Don't let anybody or nothing in the house," said Grumpy. "Oh, Grumpy," said Snow White, "you do care. I'll be careful, I promise." She kissed him and the others goodbye, and the dwarfs went cheerfully off to work. A few minutes later, the queen came to the kitchen window. "Making pies, dearie?" she asked. "It's apple pies the men love. Here, taste one of these." She held the poison apple out to Snow White. Snow White remembered the dwarf's warning, but the woman looked harmless, and the apple looked delicious. Snow White bit the apple, then with a sigh, she fell to the floor. Told by the birds and animals that something was wrong, the dwarfs raced back to the cottage. They saw the queen sneaking off, and they ran after her. As storm clouds gathered and rain began to fall, the dwarfs chased the queen to the top of a high rocky mountain. Crack! There was a flash of lightning, and the evil queen fell to her doom below. Well, that's one way to get rid of the evil queen. But it was too late for Snow White. She was so beautiful, even in death, that the dwarfs could not bear to part with her. They built her a coffin of glass and gold, and day and night they kept watch over the beloved princess. There she was, the beloved princess. One day, a handsome prince came riding through the forest. As soon as he saw Snow White, he fell in love with her. Kneeling by her coffin, he kissed her. Snow White sat up, blinked, and smiled. The prince's kiss had broken the evil spell. She wasn't dead after all. As the dwarf danced with joy, the prince carried Snow White off to his castle, where they lived happily ever after. Now that's the end. Hopefully I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.